news this weekend of Nico Iamaleava transferring out of Tennessee after essentially failed negotiations for renegotiating his NIL deal. And for those of you who don't know, Tennessee has essentially been paying him this NIL money even since high school. They recruited him when he was a junior in high school, honored the deal that they did, and after Nico had a really strong freshman year, Nico's camp and everything pretty much said, "Hey, we won at least $4 million, or we're out of here." And luckily and fortunately, Tennessee played hardball with them and said, "Yeah, we're not renegotiating with you, and yeah, you can go then." And I think for Tennessee, I think that's really the only option that they had, because obviously every agent in the country wants to get a little bit more for their client, and we're not necessarily sitting there saying that they don't have the right to do that or that they shouldn't do that. But the reality is you're going to lose the entire locker room if you decide to take the knee and pay him. Because yes, you have a couple names there that don't have much experience. They only have 2 scholarship quarterbacks now. However, Nico's camp tried to make Tennessee show their hand, and they said, "You know what? We really don't need him if that's the way you're going to be." And I quite frankly think that's the perfect attitude that they need to have. I mean, Josh Heupel is a brilliant offensive mind. They're going to maximize what they have now. And it's certainly possible they might go after Brandon Sullivan, too, the transfer quarterback who was at Iowa last year, started the latter half of the year in place of Cade McNamara. So that could be another target that they decide to go after, unless they just want to stick with the 2 guys that they have. But now that we have all that kind of figured out, most 2 important questions we have to ask ourselves now is, A, where does Nico's go from here? And B, what does this mean in terms of college football as a whole? And I think that's probably the more important conversation to start out with, because Tennessee, this whole thing is essentially the reason why the NCAA lost their any sort of authority whatsoever, because the reality is Tennessee went to bat for Nico and his eligibility and everything. And that whole lawsuit, court thing, whatever you want to call it, that's what really broke the camel's back in terms of the NCAA having any sort of authority whatsoever over college football. And everybody likes to think that, oh, NCAA didn't have a backbone. Oh, they let things, go to the shit too hard. But the reality is that all these schools kept suing the NCAA to the point where the NCAA kind of had to fold their hand and say, "Hey, there's nothing we can really do anymore. We're just going to kind of let this play out as it should or as it's going to. And this is really the consequence of it." And it's definitely a total FU if you're Tennessee and you're a Vols fan, because you went through all this time, all this effort for just to turn around and say, "Hey, you're going to have to double my pay or else I'm out of here." And yes, is Nico a sensational talent? Absolutely. Does he have the potential to be a game changer for a certain team? Absolutely. However, I think there were a lot of times where Nico showed some inconsistency. He showed that, yes, he is a younger quarterback. He did struggle a little bit with his decision making. He isn't as consistent as you would like to see for that $4 million price tag to begin with. And overall, you kind of ask yourself too, where would he go next? And there are a couple of intriguing options. And, the thing is too, you completely have the SEC schools eliminated from the equation because of a bylaw that they created. I think it was sometime last season, in terms of saying, hey, in the spring window, an SEC player can't transfer to another SEC school. Because I know, at least for me, if the SEC were an option, the 2 schools that come to mind in terms of who can use Nico immediately, I would argue Arkansas and Mississippi State would have been an intriguing option. But now that we don't have the SEC as a kind of, jumpstart there are a couple of schools that kind of come to mind. I think the 2 most obvious ones have been reported a bunch. I have seen other people talk about Oregon and Notre Dame, for example, and I would push back on those 2 things for 2 different reasons. I'd say first and foremost with Oregon, I think they're very comfortable with Dante Moore right now. I think he is legit number one quarterback. I think, quite frankly, you're at the point now where it's a little bit too late in the game to be introducing another quarterback like that. And if you're Dante Moore too, I don't see why you'd stick around if they brought in Nico, because to me, the message would be what Dan Lanning would be sending to him is, hey, we don't think you're good enough to be starting on this team and that we need backup right away. And I don't think that really makes sense for Oregon, especially with the amount of talent that they have on their team, to really bring him in, stir the pot like that, because everybody seems to think that Nico had all the leverage in this situation. And I seriously push back on that. I've heard people sit there and say, oh, Nico and his camp, they have all the leverage in the world in this situation. Yeah, they do to a degree, in the sense of, yes, Tennessee needs him to be there. Ideally, in a perfect world, they would love for him to be there. However, what does this say about Nico's character? What does this say about him as a person? To me, what this says is, quite frankly, you're not a team player and you don't really give a shit about the program, the tradition, nothing else that really what makes it sort of a commitment too. And obviously you're not employed by the school. You're not obligated to be there. But at the same time too, if part of winning a national championship and having success on the field is having rapport with your teammates, building that chemistry, building that sense of, camaraderie together. And I walk in and I've been earning my stripes and I've been with this program 3-4 years. And then you see this guy from Tennessee come in and request, loads of money for one good season. I'd be a little bit skeptical. And granted, at the end of the day, college football is a business to some degree, right? Because at the end of the day, you're judged by wins and losses, not necessarily by how good the school's doing or what your graduation rate is or what happened in terms of how healthy your players are. Yes, there's always an element of that, but the reality is that in this sport, you're judged by wins and losses, and that's going to stick with you no matter how you roll the dice. So yes, I guess we could talk about Oregon a little bit. And Notre Dame is going to be another one too, because obviously last year they brought in Riley Leonard last year. Then the year before was Sam Hartman. So if they want to make it a third, yes, I guess it would make a little bit of sense for them to consider Nico. But I just don't think Marcus Freeman is the type of guy that would dig that deep in terms of the quarterback room. I think they're kind of comfortable where they're at. And I just don't think Notre Dame's going to make that type of splash in this situation. And quite frankly, by the springtime, if you're an administrator of a school, you already have your budget well laid out. You pretty much have 90 to 95% of your roster figured out already. The only thing you're really kind of figuring out is any player who might have had a last second thought of, hey, I'm not feeling this anymore. Hey, maybe my academics changed, or hey, maybe my agent got me another couple $100,000. That's really what the conversation is at this point. And then maybe you're trying to get some depth at a couple key spots, or maybe you miss on a couple players in the wintertime. So the market for Nico essentially is really dried up, in my opinion. And I think that's another whole reason why I really don't think Nico has a lot of leverage in this situation. Now, do I think whoever he ends up going with will probably get more than 2.4? Yeah, I think you would have to get more at this point, considering the situation that you're in. And yeah, you have 3 years of eligibility tacked onto that too. So I mean, you would hope that you're going to get more than 1 year out of him. But at the same time too, if he does this shit again and just has a great year, the next season he does it again, you can consider it as a 1 year rental, maybe help with recruiting a little bit and kind of go from there. But to me, the most obvious spot would be UCLA. And I say UCLA for a couple of reasons. Number one, obviously his ties to California make a ton of sense, especially if he wants to be close to his family again. If you want a completely rebuilt sort of persona, that kind of gives him a chance to really be in his own, be in a place where the pressure might not be as immediate, in the sense of, yes, you play in the Big Ten, and UCLA is kind of in this rebuilding sort of stage too. But if Nico really wants to be the guy to kind of lead a team, be able to start something from essentially scratch, because at this point UCLA is in the thick of a really big rebuild, it could be a really fun opportunity for him. Now, granted, the only thing I would be concerned about from Nico's perspective is the offensive line was horrific last year. Anybody who's watched an ounce of UCLA football knows that Ethan Garbers was getting hit on practically every other play. Now, granted, that kid deserves a lot of credit for what they accomplished last year in the sense of that he tried to make lemonade out of the lemons that he was provided with. But at the same time, too, UCLA does have its challenges too. I mean, the NIL money's not there as much as you would like to. The recruiting is taking a little bit to get there. Obviously, when you get spanked by USC in terms of recruiting every year, that doesn't help either. But to me, in terms of all those logistical reasons, the UCLA would make the most sense to me, especially when you've seen past couple coaches such as Jim Moore and Chip Kelly who have been able to make UCLA pretty respectable for the most part, even though the latter years of their tenures ended up kind of falling apart a little bit. UCLA, you can win there. I mean, we've seen it over the past 2 decades or so that UCLA, for the most part, can be a respectable program, even though they are in the thick of the Big Ten. But the other program I'm going to throw out there, I'll throw 2 other ones out there real quick. I think for the most part, people have talked about North Carolina in the sense of, hey, it's Bill Belichick's year 1. They want to make a splash. Right now, as it stands, you have Max Johnson as your starter, who was injured in week 1 last year. And yes, he is an experienced guy, and he is more of that pro style type of player. However, I think the injury part of it, you have to be concerned about a little bit. You don't have Jacoby Criswell anymore. So the quarterback depth isn't really ideal at North Carolina, but I think that would really turn some heads even more than they already are at now. So if they want to double down on being a whole media circus for college football this year, why not maybe take a grab at Nico? Now, are they going to pay him 2.4 or 4 million? Maybe not, because they already paid Belichick a shitload of money. But maybe if they can get him in that 3 to 3.5, that might be a conversation worth having. And the last wild card team I'll kind of throw out there too is also in the ACC, but I'll throw Florida State out there too. Florida State, they brought in Thomas Castellanos, and I'm a huge fan of his. I do think he is a legit dual threat guy. I do think that there's some question marks in terms of how well he can throw the ball, because I think when he was asked to do that on an extensive basis, there definitely were some question marks there. And then the rest of the quarterback room in Florida State too, quite frankly, is inexperienced. Number of 3 and 4 star guys who could have the ability to maybe start in a year or 2 from now, but certainly not anytime soon. So I think Florida State is definitely another intriguing possibility, especially when you have a brilliant mind like Gus Malzahn running their offense too. So I would say UCLA should downright be the favorite right now. I think that makes the most sense. I know people are throwing USC out there too, but I think they like Jaden Maeva too much. And quite frankly, I would too if I were Lincoln Riley. So give me Nico to go to UCLA.